Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. Today we are breaking down the top 4 and the top 16 of Mox Masters March. For those who don't know, the Mox Masters series is a culmination of the work between Eminence Gaming and Playing with Power. They bring these monthly now online web series tournaments, and people play over webcam and compete for some pretty nice prizes. So without any further ado, let's break down the top 16 of this tournament today. Remember, while you're watching this video, to hit like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton. And if you're feeling extra generous, make sure to check out patreon.com/comedianmtg, where you can get such benefits such as exclusive Discord channel access, your name in the show notes, and many, many more. Without any further ado, let's jump into this top 16. We are starting things off with another top 16 run by a Tivit list. This list is starting to really populate a lot of top 16s. We are seeing this list, just perform over and over again. There's been multiple iterations on the list, but a lot of the flex slots seem to be around cards like Academy Manufacturer, which is in this list, Urza, things like that. This is the first time I've actually seen a Ledger Shredder in a Tivit list. They usually don't use the graveyards a ton, so I'm a little bit surprised to see a Shredder in here. I've been actually really underwhelmed by the card in basically everything but Blue Farm, and even then, mostly just Tymna decks that really do use the graveyard. Apart from that, Shredder has really been underwhelming in a lot of strategies I've seen. Also a little decent if you're going for Reanimator type stuff, but very surprised to see it in a Tivit list. This list is running Reshape as well, but not Transmute Artifact, which is really strange to me. I don't know if this is a budget inclusion that has moved over towards this cEDH list for this tournament, which is strange because these tournaments are completely proxy friendly, so it's a little bit odd. I've also noticed that there's no wheel package in this list. Some lists are, including my own, are playing Notion Thief as well as Windfall and Time Twister, but this one just has Notion Thief with none of those wheel payoffs in the list. Apart from that, it is a pretty standard Tivit list, running things like the Time Sieve combo to take infinite turns, running loops with Displacer Kitten, 3 mana Teferi, and any artifact in the list, and obviously playing your Thassa's Oracle for Demonic Consultation combos. Dargo Thrasios, but not Dogwater. If you recognize the name of that list, it's because this is by Manila Midget, the winner of Mox Masters December, which was the second Mox Masters event put on by Playing with Power and Eminence, and this was also the list that beat me in the finals. So it's also not the only Thrasios Dargo list we see in today's tournament, but we'll break down the other list a little bit later. Basically, these Thrasios Dargo lists tend to be, sort of your Thrasios Advantage Engine decks with things like Kinnan and Basalt Monolith combos, playing the Seaborn Muse, classic Thrasios style stuff to gain you a bunch of advantage and use Thrasios as an infinite mana outlet, but taking advantage of the fact that Dargo has 7 converted mana costs, so you can Neoform into a Tidespout Tyrant and be able to combo off with cards like that. There's also things like Selvala Heart of the Wilds, which with Dargo taps for 7 mana and also acts as an outlet for infinite Dargo casts, because a lot of the time 7 power will be the greatest thing on the board. So if, for example, you're using Phyrexian Altar loops with Dargo, you can actually draw your deck with Selvala. These lists are also playing Displacer Kitten, being able to flicker things like the Eternal Witnesses, your Endurance, Gilded Drakes. Dockside specifically is the main reason to be able to do this, and then you also get to flicker your mana dorks as well, or your mana rocks I should say. Apart from that, the list is playing a lot of more explosive pieces combined with some Thrasios mid-range pieces. So you see a lot of your interaction suite that you're used to, but you also see some quicker pieces, things like a Jeska's Will, which you won't find a Thrasios Bruce Dawnmaker list, but you'll tend to find in these more fast-paced lists. It's a lot similar to when people were playing the Thrasios Bruce Underworld Breach strategies or the Thrasios Akiri Underworld Breach strategies, but now the command zone is enabling them a little bit more, and you sacrifice white for the ability to have Dargo in the command zone, which provides you a lot of layered combos. Now, I know earlier I mentioned the card Phyrexian Altar. It's very important to understanding this strategy because Phyrexian Altar allows you to sacrifice any creature to create a red mana. But with Dargo, its cost is actually reduced by the amount of things sacrificed this turn. So The way it works is if you sacrifice 3 things, so the initial colorless cost of Dargo is actually paid for that turn. Dargo only costs red mana. Now, when you sacrifice it and it goes back to the command zone, you've sacrificed Dargo an additional time, and Dargo's cost reduction ability actually gets through commander attacks. So basically, the turn that you execute this loop, as long as you've sacked 3 things before you sack Dargo the first time, you're able to use Phyrexian Altar to recast Dargo out of your command zone infinitely, which allows you to have infinite casts, and usually there's a lot of outlets for it. As I mentioned, things like Selvala, things like Tidespout Tyrant, stuff like that, that allows you to be able to take advantage of infinite casts of Dargo and win the game. They also play a bunch of things like Underworld Breach and stuff like that. Greater Good is really strong with Dargo, and there's a lot of different layered ways to actually win with this deck, but it's mostly a Thrasios midrange deck with a lot of explosivity due to Dargo in the command zone. This is My Little Dummy by Ara. This is Alana, who is a pilot that you should probably know at this point, has top 16 so many tournaments, is a really inspirational player to watch, is always one of those tournaments who I know when I go to an in-person tournament that I will probably play against Alana in the top 16, if not know that Alana is also in the top 16 with me. Just a player who consistently performs over and over again, tends to play more aggressive strategies, so known for either Rog Silas or playing Blue Farm. Alana's been playing a lot of Rog Silas as of late, and once again playing it in this tournament. Now, I've noticed this is, you can always check by the lands, this is the 24 land version, close to Bryant Cook's version of the iteration of this deck. And I know Alana has spent a lot of time working on this strategy and a lot of time just playing what Alana considers a very good list, and it's, doing the classic Rog Silas thing. As I mentioned, playing 24 lands. It's a very low to the ground deck, trying to just resolve an early Ad Nauseam, an early Underworld Breach, using the cards like Last Chance and Final Fortune to really take advantage and turn the tempo of the game in your favor, getting to be able to use SWAT, Guardianship, and Rollick as early as the first turn of the game just by having Rogrek in the command zone, and then having Rogrek enable a lot of the speed of your deck, and being able to take advantage with payoffs like Bolas Citadel, Necropotence, and Ad Nauseam to be able to turn that advantage into wins with things like Breach or Thassa's Oracle. This is called Current Playing List by Pixel by Tuca. So this was Pixel who actually made this top 16 performance. You might recognize Tuca as someone who top 16 with Tayam also very recently. They are actually brothers who I played in the first round with another Tayam pilot. So my first round of this tournament was actually 3 Tayams and myself. So it was definitely a crazy pod, but it's also really funny that this happened the week after I was talking about having a Tayam pilot on the channel and basically talking to Tuca, not the person who top 16 here, but the person who top 16 the last tournament, the brother, about being on the channel to talk about this deck, which is in the works, but probably going to happen later in the year just due to scheduling things. But Tayam's a really interesting deck. It is basically this Rule of Law proof combo deck that uses the graveyard. Tyvar is like a really good new addition to the deck, and I feel like it's enabling a lot of lines that the deck didn't have previously. I've also noticed that Tyvar has been a huge benefit to 5-color Sisay decks as well, so this card is definitely making a splash in cEDH, as well as being mentioned with some Hermit Druid strategies as well. It's definitely doing its thing. This deck is, the weirdness about this deck is that it's got these counter synergies in the list, but it's also for the most part a heavy stacks deck as well, because Tayam really allows you to break through a lot of traditional stacks pieces, allows you to play your Rule of Law effects, saying your opponent's going to cast 1 spell per turn. You can play things like Draenith and your Aven Mind Sensors and your opposition agents, all of those things, while also being able to continually generate advantage as long as you have counters on the permanents in your deck. And as long as you have those counters, you can start removing them and really generate a ton of value that often, as I mentioned, breaks traditional understanding of when you can cast spells and generate advantage. So Tayam's a really interesting deck. I think it's a very complicated deck, and a lot of people struggle with it and don't really recognize the full potential of it because of how complicated the deck is. But I've played against it many times. I'm always very respectful of it because it always puts up really insane results when it does well, and it was a really, really insane pod to play against 3 of them in the first round. It was definitely a slog fest, and I was very lucky to be able to scrape out the win of this match. But Tayam's a deck that I respect a lot, and very, very proud to see it here in another top 16. This is Gas 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 by Hagam Dempsey. It's a Najeela list. I believe this is a little bit more of a mid-range Najeela list because a lot of the like turbo Najeela lists are not playing cards like Nature's Will or Druid's Repository anymore. They're really only using Derevi and Grim Hireling to win, which this list is also playing as well. This list is also on Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation Lines. It is also on Underworld Breach as mentioned, so it's sort of more towards the turbo ad nauseum style Najeela lists that have been about lately, but also choosing to play some of the win conditions that have been played in Najeela a little more historically and less in recent times. Also very funny to see Rograk being played in this Najeela deck because it's it is a warrior that does enable Najeela. When I had first heard about people trying Rograk and Najeela, I thought it was kind of a meme, so very surprised to see this top 16 deck actually utilizing that as part of the strategy for this list. Apart from that, Najeela is a very, very solid deck trying to, use the fact that there's 5 colors and a really cheap commander to enable cards like Deflecting Swat, Deadly Rollick, and Fierce Guardianship out of the command zone and have a really powerful tempo piece ready to be used at any time. Najeela is very strong and, definitely a contender for top decks of the format at the current moment. So this is Edric, Vanguard of Time by LJ. LJ is the main person who runs the Edric list on the cEDH decklist database right now, and LJ is someone who shows up to many tournaments, does really well when they do, and always plays Edric for these tournaments. LJ has been like the person keeping Edric alive for years and is, consistently putting up results because LJ knows their deck, right? Like they just play it a good amount. Definitely some more spicy options than the last time I saw this list. Last time I didn't think there was a Grazlax in there. Uro or God of Turtle Kefnet was definitely not on the list last time I saw LJ sleeve this deck up, so it's been a little bit of a minute. You'll also notice this deck is playing Soratami Cloud Skater, and if you notice, part of the cost of that ability is to return a land to the hand. So when I saw that, my immediate thought was that this deck is using Mystic Sanctuary to be able to loop turn spells over and over again. But for those who haven't played Edric, the point is kind of to get these cheap evasive creatures, your things like your Ludicrous Core that aren't blockable, Treetop Scout, your Night Veil Sprite, all of these unblockable value creatures, and to be able to just chip into your opponents and use the fact that Edric draws a card for each time you damage an opponent to draw a ridiculous amount of cards, which allows you to basically make the fact that you're playing all of these infinite turn effects and these extra turn effects become essentially a way to actually win the game. A lot of the ending of this is using the card Nexus of Fate because that does shuffle back into that person's library. Eventually there becomes a point where you are just drawing Nexus of Fate and casting that over and over again and looping infinite turns with that spell. But the idea for the deck mostly is to create a scenario where you are beating down your opponents, you start casting a few turn effects, and then by the second or third turn you are either presenting a loop where you're taking infinite turns, or you just have an overwhelming force on the board and you are killing your opponents. Congrats to LJ for making an appearance with this deck when I haven't seen LJ sleeve it up in a little bit in a tournament setting, and for showing up and really putting up a result with this deck that LJ is known for, and for keeping this deck alive, which is pretty cool. So congrats. We have another Teamer Thrasios deck. It's going to notice it's a common theme of this tournament. This is a Jeska Thrasios list by Steppen Razor, who is actually a patron in the channel. So thanks, Steppen. We actually got paired up in the last pod for the Swiss of the tournament, but we all decided to draw the game, and that ended up being good for everyone because everybody made the top 16 with that draw, which was pretty cool. But with the intentional draw, and Steppen got into the top 16. So this is, very much a classic Thrasios list in the sense that, infinite mana is channeled into Thrasios for the wins, or uses Jeska as the outlet for infinite mana. You have cards like Prismite to filter that mana. You have combos with cards like Kinnan. You'll be able to use Dockside combos, things like that. Once again, another Teamer Thrasios list playing Displacer Kitten mostly just to flicker Dockside because of how valuable that engine is. Spoilers ahead, but Displacer Kitten plus Dockside is how we ended up losing the finals match. That combo just ended up completely pantsing us, and having it in hand turned into a win for the Teamer Thrasios list we're going to talk about later. A lot of these decks are the same, a lot of these mid-range engines. As you notice with Jessica, there's a few less explosive pieces like there are with Dargo, but Jessica is basically your outlet in the command zone. I tend not to prefer Jessica as a partner to Thrasios because I find that Jessica just is an outlet like Thrasios is, but just a little worse. However, Jessica does provide a certain amount of board control that other commanders and other partners that Thrasios can be paired with don't provide. So as a utility piece, for that reason, Jessica does actually provide a good amount of value. So it's a very interesting take on this archetype. Definitely some cool spicy cards in here, and congratulations to Steppen, and thanks for supporting the channel. So this is cEDH Bloodless Pod by Lisby. This is a name that we've been saying a good amount. Lisby has been putting up multiple results with Bloodless Pod, and it's taking this Blood Pod archetype, which is an archetype that's kind of been scoffed at a lot lately, and within the past few years, an archetype that's been really heavily looked down on, and making consistent top 16, top 4 performances with this deck. One of the new pieces of tech, Vivian on the Hunt, obviously being a huge piece for this list. The list also gets Skrelv, which is a pretty cool new piece for the deck. As I mentioned in my last video, the inclusion of Jetmir I think is a really smart include for Bloodless Pod. I think it's one of those cards that's just one card, turn the game around, and basically win the whole thing. I'm a Shalai when I was playing against Lisby multiple times in this tournament. Shalai ended up being a huge haymaker. The fact that it gave protection to most of the things in the deck, and also that ability to turn the excess mana into 1/1 counters on each of those creatures, especially with like Tana in the command zone. Every time you're hitting with a Sapperling, if you get a Guy's Cradle out, it's pretty trivial to pay for Shalai's ability, and then suddenly you're buffing your creatures, every single one of them, by 1 or 2 every single turn. It gets pretty insane pretty fast. Elesh Norn sort of does the same thing, and then on top of all of this, they have Kiki combos in the deck, and Kiki combos that can be used with either Birthing Pod or Vivian, like we talked about before. Apart from that, this list is just trying to be a proactive stacks deck that sort of has like a mid-range stacks feel to it, and has the ability to just play these 1-card combos in either Vivian or Birthing Pod. So congrats, Lisby, once again, for not only performing with this archetype over and over again, but performing with an archetype that has been looked down as of recent history. So congrats. Rocco 3-star meal by Drummer Boy Gnome. This is another player who I actually played twice during this tournament. Once was in round 4 and the other was in the top 16. This is a Rocco food chain deck, playing Vivian as, once again, a 1-card combo, being able to go up the Karmic Guide Felidar Kiki loop and win the game that way. Elesh Norn being a huge benefit to this strategy. And Drummer Boy, as you might recognize, was also someone who performed recently, top 16, won a recent tournament with this deck specifically. So a lot of repeat players coming in, and either coming in with decks that are repeatedly performing, or coming in and repeatedly performing themselves. So pretty cool to see. There are definitely some names that are starting to as I said, make a name for themselves, and people who are coming out and showing up week after week and doing multiple tournaments, multiple chaos events, multiple Mox Masters, and getting their names out there. So this is a really cool Rocco list. One of the Rocco lists that I truly enjoy. I really think Rocco is consistently solidifying itself as a really big player in the format, and a deck that we are going to be seeing for a long time. The fact that it just consistently can win with a good amount of speed, while also being able to get around like instant and sorcery counters for a majority of the deck, and kind of have these 1-card win conditions, have a consistent tutor in the command zone. I think there are a lot of really good things that Rocco has going for it, and it's so cool to see this uncommon legendary from a recent set just immediately solidify itself as a staple of the cEDH format. It does so many cool things. You're able to tutor cards like Moonblessed Cleric, which put Food Chain on top, which is like such a strange card that I highly doubt anyone thought was going to see cEDH play ever, but here it is. And then you get to play Food Chain in colors that don't even have Tainted Pact or Demonic Consultation, and crazy stuff like Elesh Norn, which I've heard is a huge benefit to the deck, as I know a few people who've been playing this archetype a good amount. This list is also running Academy and Arena Rector, which I really do appreciate from this archetype. I think the Rector package is actually really solid because it turns, a sack outlet plus your commander into a win condition, especially if you go get Arena Rector, because Arena Rector allows you to sack, go get Vivian, and then go up the pod line for that win. Rocco is just super solid right now. I think the deck's in a really good position, and it's a deck that I think people are going to have to really get used to seeing because I think it's a good, solid deck. Mr. Rogers, Won't You Be My Neighbor is another ROG Silas list. Going down here and checking, it's another 24 lander. This is almost identical to the list that we just talked about earlier that Alana was playing. Once again, ROG Silas just trying to kind of be the fastest deck of the format, having ROG enable a bunch of stuff in the command zone. Only playing 24 lands because the deck can afford to just be super explosive and super greedy and perform consistently. So ROG Sai having 2 top 16 performances from a deck that has just, solidified itself once again as one of the best decks in the format. So as I mentioned before, Sisay, 5-color Sisay, has been getting a lot of benefits from having access to Tyvar. This is not the first Sisay list we have seen in these recent top 16s and top 4s. And Sisay just being able to create a bunch of really cool lines where you're using cards like Tyvar and Aminatou to, play your mana dorks, flicker them, create continual advantage in the command zone, and then play this wild legendary themed deck, being able to play really spicy cards like Urtai Resurrected, which is the first time I've ever seen this card in a Sisay list. But, other cards like Chainer to be able to reanimate your threats when you need them, Sakshima the Imposter to be able to create a bunch of really spicy lines, Catilda, Dawnheart Prime, which is the first time I've seen this list, but it's actually really cool with Sisay because this allows Sisay to turn itself into a mana dork, and a lot of the time with Sisay, the whole point of the deck is that you're trying to create scenarios in which you are just getting to your 5 mana so you can start threatening those Sisay activations and threatening to be able to start controlling the board from your opponents. So Catilda is a really spicy option that I wasn't expecting from people. I know a lot of Sisay pilots I've been talking to lately are playing Skrelv now, and I'm a little surprised to not see it in this list, seeing as it's just a legendary creature that comes down super early and just adds another pit to Sisay. Apart from that, there's some other interesting cards here. Nothing super insane. I'm not used to really seeing Mayhem Devil in the 99 of these lists, just because I feel like they're usually legendary creatures that can do the same thing. Dismember here as a card I definitely have not used to seeing in the 99 of some decks, but I know I've actually been hearing a lot of whisperings of people talking about playing this card specifically to deal with Winota, which is pretty funny to me. The fact that Winota's 4/4 body is enough for people to be playing Dismember, a card that is not traditionally played in cEDH. And also with access to white mana, I'm not really sure why you're not playing something like Swords or Path. Very interested to hear the thought on Dismember. Maybe the colorless cost and the fact that you're not really using life totals in this list is enough to be able to push one way or the other. Also extremely interested to see Chromatic Aura in this list. This is not something I'm used to seeing in Sisay, and I assume it has something to do with fixing the color of mana needed for the list, but it's not one that I truly understand. I would love to hear about its inclusion because it's a little bit odd. Apart from that, really cool Sisay list. It's archetype I really enjoy, and wish I had a little bit more time to explore Sisay because I find the play patterns with it are usually super cool. I love that Tyvar has come in and really done a lot to renovate that deck and bring it up to speed with some of the format. And seeing multiple Sisays in the top 4s and top 16s of these recent tournaments has been pretty cool. This is a deck I did not expect to see. There have been 2 top 16s in this same weekend. So for those who don't know, there was actually a Chaos tournament also in the same weekend of this tournament. And if I do get a free week anytime soon, which it doesn't look like are going to be anytime soon, but I'll try and go back and cover that Chaos tournament that happened this weekend. But we have Tasigur the Golden Fang here, which, as I said, is not a deck I expected to put up 2 top 16s this weekend, but it did. And this one is, going for a classic Tasigur mid-range plan. They have things like Oko and Teferi as just value engines, Hullbreaker Horror and Toxrill as payoffs for being able to Neoform or Eldritch Evolution your commander out of the command zone. I mentioned earlier with the Tivit thing, Ledger Shredder, not a card I've been really impressed with lately. I guess it gets a little bit more value with Tasigur and being able to, use the fact that cards are in the graveyard to either delve Tasigur or, add more fodder for Tasigur's ability. Ledger Shredder's just really been underwhelmingly as of late, and just disappointing because I know it was a card a lot of people were hyped on. But for those who don't know, Tasigur is an infinite mana deck where you're trying to get, Isochron Scepter or something like that to be able to generate infinite mana, or use Birthing Pod and Hullbreaker Horror, or Birthing Pod into Toxrill to be able to control the board. Other strategies include being able to use Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation to be able to win the game that way. So it's like the Sultai mid-range deck with a little bit of Neoform and Eldritch Evolution spice in it, but most of the time just sort of a Sultai mid-range deck. And now we are jumping into our top 4. We have one of 2 blue farm lists in the top 4. For those who have been watching my videos lately or who have been paying attention to the format at all, blue farm will not be an archetype that anyone is confused by. It is using Tymna and Crom to be a Sans Green Turbo Ad Nauseam deck that also allows a mid-range plan. So using cards like Thassa's Oracle to be able to combo with Demonic Consultation, but also a bunch of different mid-range pieces like Drannith and Esper Sentinel, using cards like Facebreaker, Ranger Captain, and Grim Hireling to be able to generate a bunch of advantage with Tymna and Crom in the command zone, and then going for strategies like being able to play your ad nauseums and things like that. Blue farm has a bit of a customization. It's cool to see cards like Touch of the Spirit Realm seeing play in the list. Definitely a little bit more of a spicy inclusion, and good against things like decks that play Rule of Law. Being able to win with cards like Mnemonic Betrayal. I've noticed that this list is not running Bolas' Citadel, and it's also not running Peer into the Abyss, which has been, a lot of debate on what's the best payoffs for playing blue farm. Seems like this list is going for Underworld Breach combos, it's going for Mnemonic Betrayal, only having Wheel of Fortune, which is interesting. I know there's been a lot of debate about what wheels are appropriate to play in blue farm, and interesting to choose only a single wheel to play in this list specifically. But blue farm is, one of the best decks in the format. I know many people have argued historically that it is the best deck in the format, and I think there's a lot more of a conversation to that argument. But blue farm is a very strong archetype, playing some of the best colors, playing the best win conditions probably in the format, and being able to take advantage of the fact that it's playing a lot of really good stuff. So congrats to Jay. All right, this is Will's take on Blue Farm. This is, once again, Tymna Crom Blue Farm, playing a few different cards here. If you notice, we have Ledger Shredder, which is a card I mentioned, Blue Farm being one of the places it actually does perform, and Mercurial Spelldancer, which is a card that I have been pretty impressed with in its early days in cEDH, being able to attack with a Spelldancer when it has 2 oil counters and being able to cast a Tainted Pact, digging down your library until you hit a Thassa's Oracle, and then using the copy of Tainted Pact to remove the rest of your library is a pretty strong ability, and it basically turns Mercurial Spelldancer and Tainted Pact into a 1-card combo of sorts. Also, the fact that you can get advantage off of many of the really powerful instants and sorceries that exist in blue farm is pretty strong here. And as I mentioned with the last list, you can start to see Peer into the Abyss is being played in this version. Also Windfall and Time Twister. So definitely some significantly different choices in this blue farm list. They're only maybe about 10 cards different, but when it comes to an archetype like blue farm, a lot of the innovation is within these slots, these little micro decisions that depends on which blue farm pilot is being able to pilot the list and what their specific preferences are. So this is winning. This is my Kinnan list. This is my list. I was in the top 4 of this tournament, and it's been pretty fun to be able to consistently put up results in these Mox Masters tournaments. I wasn't able to squeak out the entire tournament win, but pretty proud to add another top 4 to my resume. This is the win-in list that I was playing at the last Mox Masters, where I made top 16 with this deck. There's been a few updates to the deck since then, but not too many crazy shifts. This deck is basically a combination of like the more explosive Kinnan list and the Big Flips version that Higher has been working on. Now, Higher's list as of late has moved off of playing things like counter spells and things like that, which I tend to prefer in my Kinnan lists. I want to be playing my Force of Wills, my Break Trap, my Guardianship, all of these blue instants. I feel like if you don't access your blue instants, then there's not really a point in playing blue. And the fact that Kinnan can do these crazy things, like have this 1-card infinite mana combo in the command zone, as well as being able to flip into these crazy creatures and be able to play interaction, I feel like is a huge advantage. A lot of things that you'll see in my list that aren't traditionally played are things like Spellskite, which isn't usually played. 10 mana Jin-Gitaxias is usually not played over 7 mana Jin-Gitaxias, but I have found that this card wins me many, many games and is able to flip the game in my favor a lot. One of the spicy cards I added for this tournament was Colossal Sky Turtle, which came up a few times. The fact that it is an uncounterable bounce is pretty relevant, and an uncounterable regrowth also allowed me to win a game or two during this tournament. So Sky Turtle performed pretty well for me, and also the fact that, you know, if you activate Kinnan and flip into it, it is a 6/5 flyer with Ward 2, which is a real clock in this deck. And then also you're trying to flip into some crazy stuff from this deck. Some things like Consecrated Sphinx, Nezahal, Nyx Bloom Ancient, Tidespout Tyrant, Hullbreaker, and Tidespout are very easy to combo off with, as you can start bouncing your mana rocks over and over again and be able to make infinite mana, pump that into Kinnan, and then draw most of your deck by flipping into something like a Thrasios. So the deck is been performing really, really well. As I mentioned, able to make a top 16 and a top 4 back-to-back at these Mox Masters events. It's been really fun to play. Made a few innovations by switching over the lands to these MDFCs, which are just pretty much better than just playing some basics that I was playing in the previous list. As I mentioned in the name of this deck, this archetype was worked on by a lot of people, and I took inspiration from a lot of different lists, as well as adding my own innovations to it. So it's been really, really fun to play. I've been enjoying Kinnan a lot. Definitely made some changes from last tournament, and you know, very happy with being able to put up a top 4 performance, especially with a deck that, in the grand scheme of things, I'm relatively new with. So I mentioned we are seeing a lot of Thrasios plus Red Commander. This is the second Dargo Thrasios list, and Freedom Waffle, officially the second person to win a Mox Masters event with a Dargo Thrasios list. This list was really cool. My only losses in the entire tournament were I lost in the Swiss to Freedom Waffle, and I lost in the finals to Freedom Waffle. So Freedom absolutely killing it in this tournament, and played very, very well the entire time. Really, really cool player. Really enjoyed playing with them multiple times during this tournament. Once again, the idea is to play a bunch of mid-range pieces with things like Kinnans and your Mana Dorks and things like that, and then also have some more explosive options, things like Bergie, the fact that you're playing Displacer Kitten with your Dockside combos, the Tidespout Tyrant, things that we talked about with Neoforming your Dargo into them, as well as this list playing a few other pieces like Fire Giant's Fury, which can basically turn Dargo into a draw 9, Life's Legacy, similar things, Ever's draw 7, a lot of different things that allow you to turn Dargo into an early explosion, playing the Phyrexian Altar combos we talked about, Underworld Breach, Greater Good, a lot of different stuff that basically turns Dargo into a quick win. And this archetype proving that it has a lot of legs to it and performing well in multiple Mox Masters tournaments. So Thrasios Dargo not only having a top 16 performance, but having 2 wins in the Mox Masters tournament series. I'm so curious to hear what you guys think of this. Tell me about these lists. What do you think were like these really spicy options in this tournament? What did you surprised by? What were the archetypes that you weren't ready for? I know I was definitely not ready to see 2 copies of Thrasios Dargo in this top 16, as well as a number of other archetypes. So it's really cool. I feel like the meta is starting to get a little bit of definition, but it's not the definition that people would expect. A lot of people would assume that things were just going to be leaning towards heavy Turbo Nas, but there were as many blue farm decks as there were Thrasios Dargo decks in this top 16. There's a lot of mid-range decks as well. So it's really interesting to see that there are these like green creature decks that are also competing with these Turbo Ad Nauseam decks really, really well. And it seems like a lot of like green creature focused strategies, as well as these, you know, as I mentioned, these turbo ad nauseam strategies seem to be really pulling ahead. And then you have decks like the Ngilo or the 5-color Sisay list, which are like kind of hybrids of both of these strategies. So a lot of really cool stuff is coming out of this format. And I'd love to hear down in the comments below, what are people thinking about these decks? Were there any the inclusions while I was flipping through that you guys were surprised by? Anything like that? Leave them down in the comments below. While you're here, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton. And remember that any help over at patreon.com/communitymtg helps the show so incredibly much. While I'm here, I'd like to shout out my affiliate Dragonshield. Dragonshield has been so awesome, sending me a number of different sleeves, and I'm going to start doing some giveaways with those sleeves for you guys because I'm super excited to be able to just share that product with you guys, and it's my way of saying thank you to an audience that has been really, really awesome and growing continuously that I'm super grateful for. I am also an ambassador for Monarch Media, meaning I'm going to be working hand in hand with that team as they start to plan events in the future. They took a little bit of a hiatus after Oktoberfest of last year, but there are some crazy plans that this group has in store for 2023, and I'm so excited to be able to announce these things. I can't quite announce a lot of this stuff yet, but let me just say there are so many cool things coming down the pipeline for Monarch, and I'm so excited to be an ambassador for that group and to be talking about the many, many cool opportunities that are about to be coming up. But we'll leave that as an exciting, hopeful prospect for now, and I can't wait to be able to share those details as they come in. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching today's video. It is greatly appreciated to have every one of you here in the audience, and I'm so thankful to be able to do what I do and have people come and enjoy this channel. If you like stuff like this, remember to hit like and subscribe real quick. Also, a reminder that I'm doing cEDH coaching, and if you are interested in booking sessions for that, feel free to hit me up at comedianmtg@gmail.com. You can also hit me up on Twitter or my Discord. Any of those things are open to messaging, and the coaching sessions have been going so well lately. I've had multiple coaching recipients make top 4s and top 16s of recent tournaments. I actually found out one of our patron coaching recipients made the top 4 of the Chaos event. So as I mentioned, I will cover that event at some point. But super grateful for everyone I've had coaching sessions with so far. It's been a really amazing experience, and I'm glad to be able to share this knowledge that I have for this format with everyone who has signed up. So if you're interested, as I mentioned, you can hit me up at any of those places. Without any further ado, thank you so much for joining me in this episode, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gonna feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing. Got a taste for blood and my tongue keeps